Gentlemen, let's begin with something simple, but real. Think back to a moment that might have slipped by without much thought. You're going about your day. Maybe you're in line at the bank or picking up a few groceries. You're not dressed to impress. You're not trying to be noticed. You're just there. Then, out of nowhere, a younger woman glances your way. And for a brief second, she smiles. Nothing dramatic. No lingering look. Just a small, effortless smile. Then she turns her attention back to what she was doing. Now here's the question. What did you tell yourself at that moment? Did you brush it off? Assume it was just her being polite? Or did you immediately think, she must be smiling at someone else? Maybe you even convinced yourself that it didn't mean anything. And that right there, that quiet, automatic dismissal, is where this whole conversation starts. Because here's the thing. Most men don't realize how often they do this. They discount themselves without even meaning to. And it's not about vanity or ego. It's about how years of messages, subtle and not so subtle, have conditioned older men to feel like they're fading into the background. Like after a certain age, they're no longer seen in the same way. And the sad part? Many of them start to believe it. They look in the mirror, and instead of recognizing the strength and wisdom in their reflection, they see only what's changed, what's been lost. So when someone, especially someone younger, smiles at them, it doesn't even register as something worth noticing. But that's a mistake. Because of that smile, it's not always random. It's not always meaningless. Sometimes it's a small acknowledgement, a quiet signal, not necessarily romantic, but human. And that signal often goes unnoticed, not because it's weak, but because a man receiving it has already convinced himself it couldn't possibly be for him. The truth is, younger women don't just see age. They sense presence. And presence is something that doesn't fade with time. It deepens. That smile might be a passing gesture, yes. But sometimes it's more than that. It's recognition of something steady, something grounded, something rare in a world that often feels like it's moving too fast. But here's the key. If you spent years believing your worth is behind you, you'll miss the signs that you're still very much seen. You'll miss the chance to see yourself through a different lens, one that honors everything you've lived through, everything you built, and everything you become. So if any part of this feels familiar, if any part of you is quietly nodding along, I want you to stay with me, because this message isn't about chasing validation. It's about reclaiming what you may have forgotten. Your presence still speaks, and people are still listening. Most older men don't realize this, but one of the most attractive things about them has nothing to do with looks, money, or even what they say. It's how they carry themselves. Presence, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. That quiet energy, the kind that walks into a room and doesn't need to prove a thing. That's what stands out. And younger women, they notice it, often without even realizing they are. They're used to being loud. They're used to fast-talking guys who try too hard, who fill every silence because they're afraid of being forgotten. But when a man walks into a space calmly, unbothered, and completely okay with who he is, that changes a room. It shifts the energy. And even in small moments, a glance, a shared smile, a casual conversation, it leaves a mark. This isn't about trying to be mysterious or playing some social game. It's about the difference between noise and weight. A younger man might walk in with a bounce in his step and the volume turned up, but it's the older man who speaks slowly, listens more than he talks, and doesn't flinch under pressure, who leaves an impression. That's the kind of presence that makes someone pause. That's what makes a younger woman smile, sometimes without even knowing why. She's responding to something she can't name, an energy that feels stable, trustworthy, and centered. Jordan Peterson often says that people are looking for order, for clarity, for something solid in a chaotic world. And that's what a mature man gives off when he's anchored in who he is. You don't need to be flashy to be felt. You just need to be real, grounded, steady. There's something almost calming about a man who isn't pulled in every direction. A man who's not checking his phone every 2 minutes. A man who makes eye contact, not to dominate, but to connect. Younger women pick up on that, not in a way that's always romantic or even intentional, but in a very real human sense. It tells them, here's someone I could actually breathe around. And in today's world, where attention spans are short and everything moves fast, that kind of stillness, that kind of confidence, is rare. That's why the smile might catch you off guard. You weren't trying to get her attention. You weren't doing anything different. But what she saw, maybe just for a second, was the kind of man who doesn't chase the moment. He is the moment, and that, more than anything, speaks louder than words ever could. There's something most men don't give themselves credit for, and that's the weight of what they've lived through. Not just in a metaphorical way, but in the real, day-to-day grind that shapes who a man becomes over time. We're not talking about job titles or financial success here. We're talking about the kind of experience that gets etched into your voice, your body language, and the way you pause before speaking. You've seen disappointment. You've made hard calls. You've lost people. You've had days that pushed you to the edge, and nights you thought you wouldn't make it through. But you did. And those moments, they didn't just happen. They shaped you. They gave you something younger men haven't earned yet. Depth. And whether you notice it or not, that depth shows up. It's in the way you stand, the way you handle pressure, the way you don't overreact to the little things anymore. You've developed a steadiness. Because you've had to. Most men, unfortunately, don't see the value in that. They look in the mirror and only focus on what's faded. The hairline, the wrinkles, the slower mornings. They don't see what those changes represent. They forget that every mark is proof of survival. Every line on their face holds a memory. Every gray strand carries the weight of a lesson learned the hard way. But here's the thing. While you may be focused on what's changed outwardly, others are picking up on what's become stronger underneath. That includes younger women. They may not be able to articulate it, but they can feel it. In a world where most people are distracted, reactive, and constantly searching for something to fill the silence, there's something magnetic about a man who already knows. A man who's been knocked down, got back up, and now walks through life with calmness instead of chaos. This kind of man isn't loud. He doesn't need to be. He doesn't fight for attention, because his presence naturally draws it. And when a younger woman smiles at him, she may not even fully understand why. But on a deep human level, she's reacting to something real, something earned. She's seeing a man who carries his past with dignity, not shame. A man who doesn't need to tell stories to prove his worth, because it shows without a word. That's the difference. Youth often brings energy, but age brings certainty. And that certainty is rare. It gives people around you a sense of safety, even if they don't consciously realize it. So while many older men walk around thinking they've lost something, the truth is, what they now have is something few people ever develop. True character. And that alone changes the way the world, including younger women, sees them. They're not fading. They're solidifying. One of the most common lies men start believing as they get older is that they've somehow faded out of view, that the world no longer pays attention, that their relevance peaked years ago, and now they're just coasting through the rest. And over time, this belief settles deep. It shows in how they walk, how they speak, and how they show up in everyday life. You see it in the way some older men avoid eye contact, how they pull back in conversations, or how they begin to speak more softly. Not because they're being thoughtful, but because they convince themselves that what they say doesn't matter anymore. They carry themselves like they're in the background, like they've stopped being seen. But here's the truth. Most of them are still being seen. It's just that they've stopped believing they are. That's the real issue. It's not the world that turned away from them. It's their own mindset that told them to shrink. What people respond to, what they really pick up on, is energy, confidence, not in a loud, showy way, but in the kind of certainty that makes someone feel steady. When a man walks into a room believing in himself, people feel it. Even if he says nothing, it's in the way he sits, the way he looks people in the eye, the way he carries stillness like armor. But when a man walks in doubting himself, that shows too. The hesitation in his voice, the reluctance to speak up, the subtle ways he disconnects. And nothing repels people faster than insecurity wrapped in silence. That's why so many men feel like they've disappeared, because they've unknowingly started living like they already have. But it doesn't have to stay that way, because everything changes the moment a man remembers who he is. The moment he sees that the storms he survived haven't weakened him, they've made him solid. Self-respect isn't about arrogance. It's not about walking around with your chest puffed out or trying to dominate a room. It's about standing in your truth and not flinching. It's about knowing what you've been through and not feeling the need to explain yourself to anyone. When you carry that kind of quiet self-respect, it naturally draws people in. You don't chase validation. You don't fish for compliments. You simply exist in your space, and that's enough. And guess what? That's when people, especially younger women, start noticing. Not because you're forcing anything, but because you're not. There's a kind of calm power in a man who knows he belongs wherever he stands. A kind of weight that doesn't need noise. And when you move through the world like that, people feel safer around you, more curious about you, and more connected to your presence. You stop being invisible, not because the world suddenly changed, but because you did. Somewhere along the way, the world convinced men that aging means fading, that your best years were the ones when you were younger, stronger, and faster, that your value was tied to what you look like at 25, not what you become over time. But that message, it's shallow. It doesn't hold up when you really think about it. Because the truth is, youth is potential, but it doesn't have proof. It doesn't have the scars, the lessons, or the grit. It hasn't seen loss and rebuilt. It hasn't endured failure and kept going. You, on the other hand, have, and that gives you something far more powerful than potential. It gives you weight. Not the kind that drags you down, but the kind that keeps you steady. That's what the world is actually drawn to. And that's why younger women sometimes respond to you in ways you don't expect. It's not about pretending to be young again. It's about standing fully in the man you've grown into. See, a man in his 40s, 50s, or even 60s who still takes care of himself, who stays mentally sharp, emotionally aware, and physically present, is a force. Not because he's trying to compete with younger men, but because he doesn't need to. He's no longer seeking outside approval. He's no longer performing. He's comfortable in his own skin. That kind of man walks into a room and doesn't have to say much. People notice. People listen. There's something about his stillness that makes noise feel unnecessary. And when a younger woman smiles at a man like that, it's not always romantic. It's often subconscious recognition. She's sensing a presence, assurance, a kind of calm that feels rare in a world full of scattered energy and loud distractions. And that calm didn't come from nowhere. It came from everything you've lived through. The hard days, the choices, the rebuilding. It all shaped you. That's your strength now. So the next time it happens, that small, quiet smile from across the room or during a simple interaction, don't ignore it. You don't have to read into it too much, but don't brush it off either. Let it remind you, you're not invisible. You never were. You've just been walking through life unaware of the gravity you carry. You don't need to prove your value. You just need to own it. And when you do, others will reflect it right back to you. You're still seen. You're still feeling it. And you still have something meaningful to offer, not just to others, but to yourself. If any part of this spoke to you, subscribe to the channel. This isn't just content. It's a space where you get reminded of what the world often forgets to say. Your presence matters. Your experience is power. And your time isn't up. It's just finally making sense. You haven't faded. You've sharpened. And the right people still feel it.